Drums of War, Chapter 47, Part 3, To Exur. Meanwhile, with the R&I, the repeated whistle-crack booms of drop pods impacting nearby brought the malicious smile to General George's face. His reinforcements had arrived. 1, then 3 more landing zones on his map lit up to show the officers and their staff were boots down. He listened as Captain Ironcloud confirmed their check-ins. Then their command centers came online behind the bulk of the attacking enemy infantry in overlapping fields of fire. He'd made a star fortress. Well, without walls, it was more than a star formation, but in principle it had a similar effect. "Fucking hell," Major Jurasek muttered before letting out an appropriate low whistle as he watched an enemy that had a decent chance of overrunning one of the strong points suddenly cut to pieces. 3rd Division command elements are boots down and hot, Captain Ironcloud stated simply. I'm relaying them the commo fix to patch them into the command net. Good. I want 2nd and 3rd Brigades to move up on the objective. Do we have any breaches? Aye, sir, Captain Sato said, and started putting up videos of some of the forward platoon elements breaching the walls. The best breach is 3rd Brigade, 2nd Battalion, 1st Platoon, Alpha Squad. Your boys doing good work. Good. We'll use that as an access point to clear the ramparts. We'll need more, though, so let's poke some more holes here, here, and here, General George said as he tapped points on the map. Bring up some captains to pummel them with SOCORs, so we won't have to scramble to get demo charges in there. 3rd Division's captain elements are boots down and acting now, Captain Ironcloud said. They're moving up to support the defensive line. Good. Do we have commo with 3rd Division's commander? Aye, sir, but the general slotted himself in as a brigadier under our command. Damn polite of him, General George mused. I want 3rd Division's main element to strengthen the defensive line. Tell them to dig in and keep their men from going off on hunting trips. Aye, sir, Lieutenant Colonel von Guter snapped. Cutting required orders now. Sato, have y'all recon guys range out a little and be quiet. Let's not get overconfident and get caught in by a big enemy push, or a secret weapon or something. Aye, sir. So, Captain Sato said slowly, there's a development. The safe operation has risen in result. Hot damn, any defectors from our enemy? Major Jurasek asked. Our scouts encounter difficulty in telling, but they think so. Make sure everybody knows we're not in target-rich environment anymore. Aye, sir, Captain Ironcloud said. I'll send out a bulletin. Be careful, civvies around. General George couldn't resist a grin putting up the corners of his mouth. Meanwhile, Captain George was forced to adopt a more deliberate, plodding gait than the one he was used to in power armor on account of the main portable shoulder-operated howitzer-class railgun cradled in his arms. Still, a 30-mile-an-hour plod was a quick sort of plodding. The platoon elements of 3rd Division were drawing streaks across the sky, and if not for the sound dampening of his helmet, the steady roar of the so many impacts close together would have been all he could hear. He'd gotten new orders. It was time to start knocking on the enemy's doors. Sir, the gunnery sergeant with the ammo case said, you're low on ammo. We getting any supply pods in this drop? Aye, sir, said the one with the spare parts. And command post should have spare ammo. Let's see if we can hit up a supply drop first, Captain George decided. The CPs will probably need every last slug. Aye, sir. Then the captain keyed his comms to reach his full command. Company, new orders. We'll let the regulars dig in and keep the enemy off our backs. LTs, get your demo crews into position and dash to the wall. Riflemen and SAW will provide covering fire. And I will provide a further deterrence. Act on your own initiative and take opportunities to advance without exposing yourselves as they arise. Good work, gentlemen, but there's more work to do. The enemy still hasn't realized that the enemy only exists to be destroyed, some answered over the comms. If they realized, they'd quit being the enemy, others rejoined. Gentlemen, keep your boots down and your heads up, Captain George said, and keyed his comms back to their default. Meanwhile, Sergeant George put an iron slug through the forehead of yet another warrior. They wore power armor, now at any rate, but in such close quarters it did them little good. He had all the Alpha Squad in this warren of concrete corridors and perilous firing positions. He was, appropriately, at point with a fixed bayonet. Just behind him was the red team, followed by blue team and green, each of them discouraged flanking by the enemy by their sheer deadliness. And gold teams fade the rear guard. Corporal Stormborn and his team were a little irked when he had ordered them to the rear, but Sergeant George had only to point out that Lance Corporal Kai and PFC May and Ray were all on the verge of losing shields. Hopefully, They'd get some time to cycle out their power supplies and check over the emitters soon. Both new guys were low on shields and power too. Private Lawson had the saw and was making every effort to live up to his boasting. He'd snapped a man upside the head hard enough to rattle him inside his helmet for nearly herring off in pursuit of fleeing enemies on his own. He'd have to have a beer in a quiet corner and talk the day's events over with the man shipside. Private Ruers was keeping his boots down and his head up, but some bad luck had very nearly resulted in a couple of floors worth of concrete and assorted building materials falling on him. He was clearly shaken, but not so bad that he had to be yelled at. There was another beer in a quiet corner to talk over shipside. Otherwise, the squad was in good shape. Other sergeants weren't so lucky. He had heard chatter in command channel that men were down. He had little doubt that a few of those would be men he knew. Sergeant George came to a silent halt in the T intersection, waved Corporal Johnson up beside him to watch his six, and leaned out over the corner looking to the left. There was a group of warriors about 40 yards down a narrow corridor in a crossing intersection. He put iron slugs through 3 of them, and they stumbled and crashed into the walls where they left bloody smears where they slid to the floor. Their fellows realized that they were under attack shortly before the grenade Sergeant George had sent rolling their way exploded at their feet. "Clear," Corporal Johnson said from behind him. "This way," Sergeant George said with a quick check on the map on his HUD as he stepped into the corridor, his weapon still trained on the pile of corpses he had just made. "We still have one of those big fuck-off cannons to deal with." The squad followed him like an extension of himself. Sergeant George silently cursed whatever bastard had competently built the rampart system. Meanwhile, Captain George sighted a heavy plasma cannon emplacement from behind the defensive line. "Watch those streamcasters," he snapped over the company channel, as he saw someone in his second platoon soak 3 seconds of fire to toss a demolition charge through the pillbox's firing slit. "You're armored, not invincible." "Aye, sir," the corporal answered. "Shields held. No heat transfer to armor. We'll cycle back for systems recovery. This isn't my first drop, sir." "Christ and gas, if you get yourself killed, I'm busting you back down to private," Captain George snapped, and his gunnery sergeant snickered over the local comms. On the one hand, the command centers had denied the enemy any cover by knocking down any buildings and structures between the landing zone and the enemy wall, while on the other hand, that meant that they had slim pickings for cover in the assault. The R&I solution to that is mobility, and the Lost Boys were the most effective division in R&I in terms of inflicting damage while remaining highly mobile. Then again, on the other hand, their concentration of troopers assailing the walls had severely reduced the maneuvering room that they could utilize. Captain George sent a slug of tungsten-coated iron through the sound barrier, through the concrete, and through the plasma cannon he had been aiming at. The wall shattered in a spray of concrete, and the heavy weapon behind exploded in a gout of plasma and burning battery materials. And Captain George tried not to think about just how horrific a way to go that was. "Sir, Captain Hammer is about here," Gunnery Sergeant with the spare parts told him. "Good. You have the targeting data on our next objective yet?" "Calcs are done. Just 2 so-calls should be enough." The other one rumbled as he made a tossing motion towards Captain George. Captain George quickly read the file, nodding in his helmet, and said over his company channel, "Company, command has me going to hit a target. Get those demo charges set and fall back to the line for resupply. You'll want frags and more ammo blocks, and bringing some door knockers with us might be a good idea. It'll be CQC in there, gentlemen. So put on your Sunday best and don't show up to the party underdressed." That done, he keyed back to local comms and said, "All right, let's meet Captain Hammer and go knock on the enemy's door." One relatively quick relocation later, and Captain George was bumping fists with Captain Hammer in front of the company command center. "You get your calcs?" "Aye, we figure we can make the gate fall over flat with the right hits." "Oh, you're getting fancy, are you?" Captain George asked as he keyed the faceplate to be transparent from the outside. He wanted his colleague to see his shit-eating grin, after all. "Of course," Captain Hammer answered, as he showed his own grinning face in turn. "But before we do that, shall we pop in and say hello to the old man?" Captain George hefted a man-portable shoulder-operated howitzer-class railgun, and one of the gunnery sergeants took it from him and said, "We'll have it set up by the time you're done, sir." "Don't let him hear you calling him that," Captain George lightly rejoined. "So far as he's concerned, he'll never get old. Buddy, I have news for the General." Captain Hammer slyly muttered as he too relieved himself of his heavy weapon and turned towards a temporary building housing the command center. "Pops," Captain George said as he stepped into the command center. General George looked up from the maps showing the progress of the battle to see his oldest striding in. He was clear-eyed, straight-backed, alert and keyed in, boots down and head up. He was the very picture of a fine R&I officer. A deep swell of pride rose up within him, but he dismissed it. There would be time to be proud of his sons later. For now, there was work to do. "Captains, there you are," he said. "So far as I can tell, the outer pillboxes are all silent, or will be soon, and the demo charges are set. It's not strictly needed, but the historical record will appreciate it if we knock on the door first. So, if you would please." "Aye, sir," Captain George answered before asking, "How's Linus doing?" General George sent a breath out through his teeth, and those who knew him well would see it as an expression of his worry as he tapped on the map where his last active anti-orbital cannon was displayed. "He's here. I expect he's kept the enemy from manning this position mainly by denying them men for it. But knowing him, we'll hear it's been disabled successfully." Captain George glanced skyward and said, "Nelson, enspearment is complete. The saw is hammering the enemy up there until they either surrender or are destroyed. Nelson is putting RRG back for rescue and repair ops." Good news, Captain George sighed. "Aye, son, it's good news. Better, no all-hand losses." Captain George sagged, like a man who is suddenly relieved of a tremendous burden, and the general instinctively stepped in to support his son. But the younger man caught himself before he got there. "Thank God," Captain George said, almost too softly for his mic to pick up. "The victory is ours to hold," General George told him soberly, "so long as we don't drop it." "Aye, sir. Time to get back to work," Captain George said, in the more businesslike tones of the R&I captain before asking slyly, "Unless the Navy sent down some coffee." "No luck," Major Jurasak scoffed ruefully. "Damn," Captain George said, and General George returned his son's salute before he watched him about face with an almost casual grace and stepped back out of the command center. "Captain Hammer," the general said, "did you need something?" "Aye, sir. My company will need resupply before we enter the breach. Any supply drops near them with frags and ammo?" "Of course," the general said with a glance towards Major Jurasak, who tossed the young man the necessary data. "Thank you, sir," Captain Hammer said with a salute and left. "Good kid," Captain Ironcloud remarked. "I would like to see him promoted." The general scowled at the map. "Like has nothing to do with it. Command and MH have my recommendation, and I've gone out of my way to make sure nobody can say I went easy on my boys." "He would do well at a battalion level," Captain Sato stated agreeably. "I do not understand why he's still at captain." "Gentlemen, the subject of conversation will not help us in our current operation. Drop it, if you please." A thick silence fell amongst the staff with the general's formal words, as the men were wondered whether they had overstepped. "Let's just say that the decision is out of our hands, and be proud of the work he has done for us today." The staff let out a collective breath, and General George reminded himself that he was more than their companion. He was their commanding officer, and his disapproval carried weight whether he wanted it or not. Meanwhile, Sergeant George was calling in. "Objective complete. Enemy fully denied anti-orbital cannons. If no further orders are coming, I intend to backtrack until we link up with friendlies." His lieutenant responded, "Negative. Backtrack to Palace Breach and hold. We're about to make some new entrances and come in to meet you." "Aye, sir. Hold position at Palace Breach. Hold position and link up on arrival. New objective?" "We're to take the throne room. Our brigade is meant to clear and secure the entire above-ground facility." "Understood. Do we have a good way to tell civvies to surrender yet?" "We have the translation for throw down your weapons and submit. But the concept of surrender seems to be only in them accepting surrender from others." "Understood. We'll attempt to encourage surrender with the translated phrase." "Good work so far, Sergeant." "Thank you, sir. Moving out now," Sergeant George said, as the explosion of the demolition charges of his squad had placed from the anti-orbital cannon rocked the building. "Okay, kids, it's time to hurry up and wait," he said over the squad comms. Among the Exarch, Juvenile 93769758 couldn't do anything to make their tears stop flowing. The very ground beneath her shook, dust and grit fell from the walls and ceiling around her, and the very air thrummed with the distant pounding of the Skylight people's terrible weapons. She began to believe what the teachers had told her of the wrath of the sons of the vengeful goddess Republic. But also she began to ask why their wrath and vengeance should fall on her world. Inside the palace, Lord Master Quaden Anha took wide, lumbering steps inside his power armor. He cursed it for its slowness, for its cumbersome bulkiness, and for its inadequacy in the face of the armor worn by the vengeful sons of the Goddess Republic. Still, without it, he was sure that he would be torn to ribbons. The trail of bodies leading to the great cannons indicated that he might still be ripped asunder by the fury of whatever he wore. The standard plasma caster was useless against this foe, but a heavy model intended for disabling armored vehicles had proven effective by reports from the front. It disturbed Lord Master Quaden Unha that he suddenly found the very palace to be the front, but it was his place and his purpose to defend. Let the other acolyte lords scoff at his ceremonial position after repelling this most horrific attack. Lord Master Quaden Unha raised a hand to halt his cadre of warriors, also clad in the heavy armor against the terrible weapons of the enemy. He thought he heard something. He opened his helmet to hear better, and saw a lone warrior step out into the corridor from crossing some 100 strides ahead. The warrior was like a piece of void between stars made into the shape of a man, for the two burning red embers where Lord Master Quaden Unha supposed the man's eyes were beneath that otherwise featureless helmet. He realized his head was exposed, and found his limbs were suddenly made stone. "Throw down your weapons and submit," the man said. Strangely, Lord Master Quaden Unha did not gain the impression that the man had shouted the command, but had somehow simply said it very, very loudly. Mechanical speakers, perhaps. It would be a reasonable thing for a soldier to have included in such armor. Lord Master Quaden Unha realized his mind was focusing on irrelevant details to distract himself from the quivering fear that ran through him to his very marrow. Rage boiled in Lord Master Quaden Unha's belly at his own cowardice, and he began to raise his weapon against the source of his fear. There was a tremendous boom, and he ceased to feel anything at all. Warrior Lead 3461-9120 watched his Lord Master's head liquefy as his helmet clanged like a bell thrown down the stairs and fought to keep from vomiting. He had heard of a magic word, a word deemed heretical by the nobles, yet it was his only hope. "Sor en door," he sounded out as he flung his weapon to the floor and raised his hands towards the ceiling. He knew his subordinates would watch to see if the magic word worked. He hoped to the nana that it would. Initiate Highborn Varitzin had gathered about him a strange collection of enraged men and women, from serfs and warriors, unnamed, to even some of the acolyte lords and priestesses who carried the lofty honors of names from the emperor himself. All had gathered to his cry that shook them to their very souls. "Master yourself!" seemed so simple, seemed so obvious, and yet it was wholly new. They would be their own masters, even should it cost them their lives. They came like a storm, full of fury and fire, ready and willing to kill and die to take their own mastery from those who held themselves as their betters. Nothing could stop them. They came upon where the sons of the vengeful Goddess Republic did battle against the forces of the Emperor. They came to a sudden halt. Awe, all tinged with terror, filled them at the sight of these avatars of death, cutting through that which had held them by fear and violence, like a dagger through a tense wall. Towers that had stood since time out of mind had been pounded into gravel. The corpses of the warriors carpeted the plaza before the palace. Vehicles smoldered like angry little campfires of the restless dead. Their newfound fury, their desire to choose for themselves the vengeful kindred of their hearts, quailed in the face of sheer destruction before them. Someone, an issued highborn Varitzin, saw not who, said, "Mayhap we ought to master ourselves elsewhere." An issued highborn Varitzin found himself wanting to agree, yet he knew here was the field of battle. Here was the yoke he could cast off. "No! We must needs convince those warriors who still do battle to instead join us, or submit to the sons of the vengeful Goddess Republic." Despite his terror, the initiate highborn Varitzin took his first steps forward. Many followed him. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.